Hello there. Eddie Mercado here with BloodyElbow.com, and welcome to the 6th Round Retro. The date, February 7th, 1997. The event, UFC 12, Judgment Day. Now, my co-host, none other than one of the best of all-time combat sports journalists that you will ever find, Fraser Coffeen. Fraser, thank you for joining me, sir.
It is very good to see you.
Now, this, of course, was Fraser's pick. He selected UFC 12. I have to ask, what about UFC 12 tickled your fancy that made it become Fraser's first pick?
I love this show. I feel like this show is a blast, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on it when we get in there. But it's fast paced. You know, there's a lot of fast fights in here, and it's really historic. There's a lot going on that we can talk about in the show about the sort of the history of it. It's an old version of the UFC for sure, but it's the first time they're starting to sort of feel some of the modern trappings, like weight classes and heavyweight titles and Joe Rogan and things like that. And it's a fun show overall, and then a historic show on top of being a fun show.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe Rogan had hair. You know,
he did. That's crazy.
That's something a lot of people don't even. If you're a newer fan and you think he's been bald forever, no. Dana White and Joe Rogan used to have hair back in the day. Like, of course, this UFC is pre Dana White, pre Zuffa. This is SEG, Semaphore Entertainment Group. You know, they're really trying to clean up the sport, but it was still kind of lawless. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, like you're saying, first ever heavyweight champion. Before that, it was just the tournament. If you win the tournament, then, you know, you're the UFC winner. Not exactly like a champion. And the debut of the 200-pound tournament, which, you know, they called it the lightweight tournament, which is hilarious considering what lightweight is now at 155 pounds. And we also had the debut of the phenom, Vitor Belfort, at 19 years of age. Can you imagine Vitor Belfort, 19 years of age in the UFC? What? And he's still in the UFC. So, like, that's crazy in and of itself.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so top of the billing, you had the very first ever, the inaugural heavyweight title. Mark Coleman took on Dan Severn. Now, this was advertised as a clash of these just gritty wrestlers. And, you know, each man came in with some solid experience. Coleman 5-0, UFC 10 winner. UFC 11 winner by default. Severn 9-2 in the UFC, only lost to Hoist Gracie and Ken Shamrock at this time. He won UFC 5. He won UFC Ultimate, which was 7.5. So this was like a legit heavyweight title fight, and it was sweet. I thought it was a really cool matchup, man.
Yeah, I mean, this was a big deal, and like this felt right as the first heavyweight title fight. I mean, I feel like at this time you had a couple of guys that were really clearly your top dogs in the UFC. You know, Coleman had coming off back-to-back wins in 10 and 11. Like you said, Severn had won 2 tournaments himself, plus though it wasn't like exactly a real title in the same way that the heavyweight title is, he was the super fight champion, having won the super fight title from Ken Shamrock in a notoriously horrendous match at UFC 9. Do not watch. Bad. Avoid. But you know, you had Severn up at the top. You had Coleman up at the top. Really, the only other person that was in those guys' league at the time was Don Fry. And he was on his way out of the UFC at this point. But it's built up as this great fight. It's 2 wrestlers, they're going at it, and it's a good match. It's short. It's not a particularly long fight, but it is exciting. I mean, you do get some, you get some good wrestling going on back and forth, and then you get a really definitive and very painful looking Coleman victory.
Yeah, Mark Coleman, he wins by neck crank, 2 minutes, 57 seconds into the first round. Basically, Severn comes out and tries to shoot on Coleman, gets stuffed right away. Coleman starts landing some solid punches. He's not wearing the gloves. And just whenever you see, or at least for me, whenever I look back and I watch the old fights, when the punches landed without the gloves, they just felt more real. It just seemed more gritty and more raw. And,
yeah,
I like looking back at that, watching the bare knuckles. And I think Chris Lytle actually just won a bare knuckle boxing match, if I'm not mistaken. So look out for Lights Out Lytle. He's still out there throwing his hands unprotected.
Nice.
For whatever reason.
Nice.
But yeah, so Coleman, he's landing punches. Severn goes and shoots again, but gets stuffed yet again, but this time gives up the top position. Coleman takes the back, moves into full mount, transitions into side control with the neck crank, and there was nothing Severn can do. At this point, this Mark Coleman is like one of the strongest men to ever compete in the UFC, probably. No USADA or anything like that. I mean,
no.
Coleman is like good douche. Like, there's no stopping that neck crank. So smart move on Dan Severn for tapping out, because he probably would have got his head ripped off had he not done that.
Yeah, he looks like he's just gonna like pop his head like a grape. He just like gets him in there and just like, I mean, and neck crank. I love the. I mean, I guess technically that's what it is, but that makes it sound more sort of elegant and jujitsu-y than it really is. I mean, really, it's like a pro wrestling style headlock that he just like slaps on his head and just with his just bicep just squeezes the crap out of him, and he taps out. It's pretty intense. The other thing that's really, I think, is really fascinating about this, looking back on it, is that, we're at UFC 12 here. This is early 97, so it's about 3.5 years into the UFC's existence. But I hadn't really thought about this till I watched it this time. This is sort of the first ever MMA like changing of the guard kind of fight, because Severn was clearly of that like very first, initial pioneers group. And though not a lot of time has passed, Coleman is not. Coleman is just a little bit, he comes a little bit later. UFC 10 is his debut. So it did feel like somebody with a bit more developed skill coming in and sort of, taking out the really raw, just pure wrestler that was Severn. Coleman felt like a little bit more of like, oh, this is what an actual, what nowadays we'd call a mixed martial artist is. They hadn't yet come up with that term, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and Coleman, he also brought the physicality. So it's like they both were promoted as these excellent wrestlers. However, Coleman just brought this physical element to the table that, in the early UFCs, there's a lot of dad bods going on. You know what I mean? So this was like, holy crap! Like this is a heavyweight that looks like an action figure. That he looks like a professional wrestler out there. Yeah, but it's real though. So it was the real deal, and a changing of the guard, I think, is an excellent way to put it. It was kind of short lived though.
Yeah, that's the weird thing, is that it felt like this change of guard. It felt like this coronation for Coleman. It felt like this huge deal. And he would go on to defend the title a grand total of zilch. No title defenses. First time up, 2 UFCs later, he drops the belt to Maurice Smith. So yeah, not actually a changing of the guard, really.
Yeah, and that was like a staple at heavyweight. It wasn't until Stipe Miocic just beat Francis Ngannou where he finally defended the belt 3 times in a row for the first time in history, which is insane to think about, that there's no title reigns at heavyweight longer than 3. Like that's like, what?
It is crazy. We're talking about a fight that was 21 years ago. And in the 21 years that have elapsed, nobody has ever defended that title more than twice until Miocic. That's really impressive. Now, that said, that's the UFC title. And of course, that does not include our man who we've talked about a couple of times on this show recently, Fedor. More love to Fedor for making it way more than 2 title defenses over in Pride.
Fedor's the GOAT.
Yep.
He's definitely the GOAT, hands down. Yeah, so Coleman, like you said, got his belt snatched from Maurice Smith. Then he gets kicked in the face by Pete Williams. Then he loses to Pedro Hizzo. Then he goes over to Pride, loses a match there, but then goes on a nice winning streak. And what's crazy to me is he's had more Pride fights than UFC fights. Because when I look back and recall, I think of Mark Coleman as a UFC guy, but he's actually had way more fights in Pride, which is pretty crazy. He's a Pride guy.
Yeah. I mean, and he's had some major moments in Pride. I mean, he won that first Pride GP, that it was a huge deal. And there's some asterisks you can put next to that win, but it's a win. He won the tournament. It's a tournament. That's the nature of a tournament. There's always going to be some funky things in tournaments. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
And he won that one. So, respect to Coleman for quite the career he put on over the years.
And what was interesting is he finished up his career in the UFC. Zuffa bought Pride. Coleman comes over to the UFC, goes 1-2, losing his last fight by rear naked choke to Randy Couture, another wrestler. But a pretty interesting career, like a historic career, and Coleman really made his mark with the ground and pound. Like, a lot of people call him the godfather of ground and pound, because like when this guy got you down, like his hammer fist and his just attack was so just ferocious that, I mean, it scared people. Like, this dude was scaring people. And on top of all that, he had like this insatiable temper. Like, I mean, there's YouTube footage of him just backstage. It's like he's roiding out or something, just like going on a rampage. And it's, that was a scary man back then. Like, definitely a scary man.
His celebration after he wins here is nuts. I mean, he just, he's like the Incredible Hulk all of a sudden. Like, every vein just ejects itself from his body simultaneously, and it's a little terrifying. He's very excited to win the title. It's really a lot. It's matched by his very famous one in the Pride GP win, where he wins that one and jumps up on the turnbuckle and then falls off. It's very similar here. He's pumped about that win.
Yeah. Severn, on the other hand, he goes on to have like 100 more fights. Severn's like one of those guys, man. He's like on that Travis Fulton tip.
I had to look it up to see what his official record is at this stage, and he hasn't fought in a couple of years. But the last time his official record was 101-19-7.
That's ludicrous.
It's insane. Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to get into the tournament format. So up first, we had the debut of the lightweight tournament, which was at 200 pounds. We got Jerry Bolander taking on Rainy Martinez. This is the opening round. Bolander comes out, makes quick work of this Martinez guy. He shoots in on him. Martinez actually sprawled, but it just wasn't enough. Bolander he did his thing there. Martinez was really, he just seemed like he didn't belong there whatsoever, and got choked out with the quickness.
Yeah, there's not. He's a very, very much a footnote here. This is, this fight's all about Bolander. Bolander is he's a Ken Shamrock trainee, so he comes out of the Lion's Den here. He actually has Frank Shamrock in his corner, which I'd have to go back and look at some previous cards. I think this might be he's not like mentioned, but I do think this might be our first glimpse of Frank Shamrock on a UFC show. Bolander is just, he's trained by the Lion's Den. The Lion's Den back at that time was sort of I was about to say the first like real like camp, but I feel like at this time they were sort of the only actual like MMA camp that existed. Like that was kind of it here in the US. And so, they know what they're doing over there. They have another fighter on the card who we'll get to later. And, he's a well-rounded fighter who gets the job done.
Yeah, Bolander was only 22 years old here, which is crazy because he looks much older. 2-1 in the UFC. He choked out Scott Ferrazzo at UFC 8, actually, but then he got knocked out by Gary Goodridge, your boy.
Yeah.
In the semifinals of the same night. He won a decision at UFC 11, and then he was like, okay, these guys are just too big. Luckily, there's this new weight class. So he went ahead and dropped down and got to fight guys his own size. And it worked out really well for him. He got a very clean win, injury-free, to advance to the next round. So solid win for him. Martinez, last time we saw him fight. So he was the sacrificial lamb here, so to speak.
That was it. And it's worth pointing out, he's going on to the next round. And this, not only is this the advent of the different weight class tournaments with the lightweight tournament versus the heavyweight tournament, but this is also the switch over to 4-man tournaments. So this is a semifinal. So he wins here. He's on to the finals to face the winner of our next fight, which I'm pretty excited to talk about.
All right. So go for it. I'm just gonna.
This is the fight. You just have to laugh about this one. This is just a ridiculous fight. So up next on our other side of the bracket, we have Yoshiki Takahashi versus Walid Ismail. Takahashi, a Pancrase guy, coming over there after he was a pretty decently ranked Pancrase guy, and Walid Ismail from Brazil, the sort of original Gracie hunter. He had taken out a whole bunch of Gracies in jiu-jitsu competition. Two crazy men, just both are absolute lunatics. It's an absurd fight. There's so much ridiculous stuff going on here. I can't get to it. What really stuck out to you in this fight?
What really stuck out to me was the fact that I made a drinking game out of the entire UFC 12, mostly based off of this fight. So we might as well tell everyone while they're listening.
Yeah.
Disclaimer: do not play this drinking game. It's strictly funny. Please don't attempt it. You will not survive. You're not going to make it. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just don't do it. However, here are the rules. Okay, so you take a shot anytime on the broadcast you hear Vitor Belfort instead of Vitor Belfort, take a shot. Mm-hmm. Whenever they say pancreas instead of pancrase, take a shot. Whenever Takahashi commits a foul, take a shot. And if you want the light version, you can only play during the Takahashi fight. Anytime he commits a foul, take a shot, and you will be 3 sheets to the wind by the time it's over. This fight is absolutely bananas. I lost count actually when I was trying to keep track of all the fouls here. Mm-hmm. So basically, Ismail shoots in, right? Takahashi immediately grabs a hold of the shorts with one hand and grabs the fence with the other. So he's like completely sound as a pound, like he's not going anywhere. Ishmael's butt cheek is hanging out, if not more. And, you know, Big John is yelling, let go of the cage, let go of the fence, let go of the cage, let go of the fence, like 50 times. Takahashi kept doing it. There was there was nothing. Like, number one, he doesn't speak English, so he has no idea what Big John is saying. And two, like, you know, it was like a suggested rule. Like we were saying, they were trying to clean up the sport, but it was still lawless. You know, There were no point deductions or like anything like that. So you got Takahashi grabbing the cage. You got Takahashi grabbing the cup of Ishmael to prevent the takedown, so much so that the cup falls out of his shorts. So his cup is just dangling there. Ishmael's cup is dangling. Like I've never seen that. I don't think I've ever seen that again. Like that was wild. Like what a mess.
It's lunacy. And Takahashi does respond to Big John at one point. There's one of my favorite moments in it is there's a point where, you know, he's got his fingers fully in there and McCarthy's over there slapping his hands saying, let go of the fence, let go of the fence. And Takahashi looks at him and goes, and then just sinks in again. Just, you know, yeah, sure. Let go of the fence, whatever, buddy. And boom, right back on. Like you said, there's no rules. There's like, you can't like Big John can yell at him. He can slap their hands all they want. What's he going to do? There's no points. You can't take a point. There is no such thing as points. They still announced the winners back then by writing it on like a whiteboard and holding it up. So there's no such thing as points. Big John would have been drawn and quartered if he disqualified somebody back then. I mean, that's not acceptable. So too bad, buddy. I'm just going to keep on grabbing that fence and trying to take his cup out and punch him unprotected in the groin.
Yeah, and Takahashi actually finds top position, starts landing headbutts. You know, he's headbutting. Then he stands up. As Ishmael gets up, he kicks him in the face. Like, there's so many this was just a really, really foul-filled fight. It was like the Stone Age of mixed martial arts just lingering around, where it's like surrounded by all these other, you know, all these other fights that are somewhat evolved. And then there's this one that is just a throwback. And
it's such a mess. And yet what's kind of crazy about it is that despite being this big mess and stuff like that, it actually is, you know, from a sort of matchmaking perspective, it's actually one of the most intriguing fights to set up, like in the preamble to the show, to like set up here, because again, you've got this crazy man, but very respected BJJ fighter in Ishmael, who he's submitted Royce Gracie in gi competition. I mean, that's no joke right there. So he's legit and coming in. And then you've got Takahashi, who's been over there fighting like Ken Shamrock and guys like that over in Pancrase. It does, it feels like, oh, this is like the UFC is like bringing in like respected combat sports dudes from like other combat sports. Like this is what kind of we think of as the UFC. Like guy comes in from Japan, guy comes in with all these credentials from this other world. They fight, and but it doesn't play out that way.
No, it didn't pan out quite as they would hoped. So Takahashi ended up winning the decision, and as you mentioned, the judges write the winner on whiteboards and hold them up, which I actually think is an excellent idea in terms of holding the judges accountable, especially since we had quite a few questionable decisions over these past couple UFC cards. Yeah. So I think if the judges had to face the music and actually be accountable like that, we might get a little more accountability out of our officials. But yeah, so Takahashi advances. He goes on to the next round to face Jerry Bolander. We'll see Ishmael later on in Pride. So let's go ahead and move on. Heavyweight time tournament. The big boys, Scott Ferrazzo, the rotund one, as Tank Abbott, the commentator, the guest commentator, kept calling him. He comes in and he's taking on Jim Mullen, who is considerably smaller. I don't know if Jim Mullen any relation to Jeff Mullen, one of the judges on the night. Maybe I couldn't confirm that, but Ferrazzo is huge. He comes in 3-1. He actually was submitted by Jerry Bolander at UFC 8, but he did win he didn't win UFC 11, but he beat Sam Fulton and Tank Abbott at UFC 11. UFC 11 was that weird Mark Coleman wins by default kind of madness. But Mullen, he lost one fight by guillotine a year before this. He comes in with kickboxing experience. And on the broadcast, they listed one of his strengths as upper body boxing strategy. What the hell does that mean? What is upper body boxing strategy? Like,
as opposed to that boxing with your lower body, which is yeah.
I have no idea. But Ferrazzo, 323 pounds versus the 215-pound Mullen. Like I said, Tank Abbott commentating the heavyweight bracket, talking crap about the lighter divisions. Blatnick, he actually said that the new division would open a lot of doors for a lot of fighters. And Tank goes, not the giant door. And I'm just like, man, that's a real asshole thing to say. But it still rings kind of true today. I mean, look at Demetrius Johnson dominating a complete division, but still getting minimal respect. So, I mean, his point still rings true today, unfortunately.
Tank was an interesting guy in that he did sort of represent, kind of the mind of a certain part of the audience. I mean, he's kind of speaking the voice of the common man in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he was the Affliction shirt before Affliction.
Yeah, totally. He should have fought an Affliction. That seems like a wasted opportunity.
Absolutely. So the fight itself, though, what a freak show fight this was. That's the best way I can describe it. This looked like a bouncer fighting a college student.
Yeah, huge dude. Yeah, and Ferrazzo is real. It takes Ferrazzo a while to put him away. It goes for a while. It's like 8 minutes long or something like that. But it's not actually competitive, really. It's just that it takes Ferrazzo some time to finally get this guy out of there. Ferrazzo's an interesting guy in that, like, he seems like he's going to be like and he's not like he's really good or anything like that. And he seems like he is going to be sort of this joke. But then in his interviews, I do find that he does sort of present this sort of appreciation for the sport. He talks in his like little clips about like the importance of respecting the sport and training and things like that, which is a little incongruous with him as a fighter. But he's sort of an intriguing guy to me.
Yeah, real soft spoken too.
Yeah,
really soft spoken. But I mean, he comes out and he bulldozes Mullen into the fence and just starts mauling him, kneeing him to the face as he's sitting on the ground with his back to the fence. The size disparity was just bananas here. I mean, absolutely bananas. There's a point where Big John steps in to stop the fight to have the doctor look at the eye of Mullen. And Mullen, tough as can be, said he was fine. He's in good spirits. He wants to keep going. So they restart the bout. And I'm like, man, like this dude had an out. Like he could have got out of there, but he's like, nope, I want to fight. And I instant respect for that guy, man. Tough as nails. The fight starts again. He comes out, throws a spinning back fist, but falls to the ground, eats a couple more knees, and Big John luckily stepped in to rescue him. But what guts? What guts from Mullen? He definitely should have been in that 200-pound tourney, which is unfortunate because this was the last time Mullen ever fought in an MMA match. So it kind of makes you think what could have happened if he was in the 200-pound tournament.
Yeah, there's a lot of dudes on this show who end up with records of like 0-2 or 1-1 or things like that. We already saw it with Rainy Martinez, and it's sort of a common theme in this one. Guys give it a go. They get Ferozzo'd and they're like, nah, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, so Ferozzo, he advances to the finals, which brings us to our next bout, the UFC debut of Vitor Belfort, the Phenom. He's taking on Trey Telligman here. Belfort, 1-0 at the time, 19 years old, a lot of hype behind him. Carlson Gracie disciple. Carlson Gracie's like another kind of camp that was old school back then.
True.
And Vitor was one of the first true mixed martial artists he was truly dangerous everywhere. I mean, he had very dangerous hand speed. He could throw his punches. He knew how to throw his punches, and he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So he was legit good on the ground. So it was like the next evolution of a mixed martial artist. And then you got Trey Telligman, who this was his UFC debut. He was 3-0. Vic and I actually touched on him for UFC 15.5 Ultimate Japan. Mm-hmm. So Telligman, he lost his pectoral muscle as a baby, which really freaked me out when I used to look back and watch the old school fights. But it was a great reminder to myself that I have no excuses. If this man, he has this apparent physical disadvantage, but he wasn't going to let that stop him from pursuing and chasing his dreams. So much respect, excellent role model in that respect. It didn't do much for him in this fight, though. Vitor, yeah.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate for Telligman that he goes up against Vitor, because Telligman is one of the better guys to be in the heavyweight tournaments of this sort of era. It seems unfortunate for him that he is in sort of the same position as Mullen was on the other side, because Telligman he's got more to offer the sport than just that, and he eventually does. He goes on to have some other fights. He also came out of the Lion's Den, so another Ken Shamrock trainee there. But yeah, Belfort, man, he is just, it's crazy here. So, the interesting thing is it's not like there's a whole lot of, there's a tremendous amount of footage on guys. I mean, Belfort had one fight. So kind of the assumption going in here, because he's got Carlson Gracie in his corner, and because Carlson Gracie's last name is Gracie, the assumption that everybody has going in here is like, oh, this guy's going to be another, ground wizard. He's going to do what Hoist did. He's going to, take somebody down. He's going to do the jiu-jitsu. We're going to see, the next step in this. And Vitor has that skill in his pocket, but he does not show it at all here, because this is stand-up striking beast Vitor. He comes out guns a-blazing and does that thing that he does when he's so impressive, where he just lights him up and makes it happen, and uses his hands very impressively, and is able to put Telligman away quickly. And you're right, it really, really feels like, oh, this is a thing. Like instantly when he fights, you're like, this is a new point in the sport, this guy. Like he is a line in the sand about what we're seeing.
Yeah, Vitor comes out, he pressures Telligman and just lets his hands go, and we all see the hand speed, and everyone's just like, holy shit, is this really happening? Like this is movie stuff. Like there's no way this dude's this fast, this quick, this athletic, this big, like he was cut. Like,
he's jacked up.
Just, woo, like I said, no USADA. So Telligman falls down from eating a big punch, and Vitor gets on top of him and just starts elbowing him viciously. They might have been 12-6 elbows too before those were banned. And man, Telligman I think he verbally submitted. Dude, he was dead to rights. But what a phenomenal UFC debut, and an awesome quick finish to advance in the tournament. So awesome debut for Vitor Belfort. I know he was getting the attention of Tank Abbott. Tank had to commentate that, and he was trying to slough him off, but it's hard to deny. It's hard to deny what Belfort did out there. And Tank's response was like, "Oh well, let's see how he does against the rotund one," you know. And yeah, Telemann, like you said, he went on to do some good things. He picked up a win at UFC Japan. He picked up a win over Igor Vovchanchyn, who is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's no joke right there. That's a solid win.
Yeah, and then finally retired after his head kick knockout loss to Tim Sylvia at UFC 54.
I was sort of surprised in looking at this that Telemann only ended up with a record of 7-5-1. He feels like that seems like way fewer fights than I would have guessed off the top of my head. You know, yeah. I feel like he's a guy who I've seen more of than just a 7-5-1 record, you know?
It could be just because like the injury that you just don't forget his appearances.
That might be
they have a lasting impression, at least for me anyways.
Yes.
All right, so right after this fight, we get a backstage report from Joe Rogan with the hair, and he tells us that Takahashi broke his hand and will not be able to continue in the tournament. So Nick Sanzo, who won an alternate bout earlier in the night, which we were unable to watch because it's lost in the ether. So if anyone out there has any kind of footage of this or a link or whatever, add us on Twitter, put it in the comment section because we would love to watch it. However, so Takahashi out of the tournament.
And out of the UFC, never to return. That's
never to return. And
very well, Takahashi.
If you were bothered by the questionable tactics of Takahashi, fret not, for he had his comeuppance in Pancrase and Pride, getting knocked out by Simi Schilt twice, Heath Herring, Igor Vovchanchyn, Vitor Belfort, and Melvin Manhoff. Yeah. So he got what was coming to him. So don't worry about that.
That's true.
All right. So that means Nick Sanzo, he's in the finals taking on Jerry Bolander. And this was a bullshit-ass submission hold. I'm not even going to lie. 39 seconds into the first round, it was like this full Nelson sort of move that Ken Shamrock called a crucifix, but whatever, man. That was just, I don't know. That was terrible. It was the worst submission I've ever seen, I think.
It's really weird. It's hard to even explain it. So he sort of gets him like it's like a full Nelson, but like from the opposite side, and he's sort of cranking his head back. It's
like a top side full Nelson.
I guess so. That makes sense. Yeah.
It's bad. Like it's bad.
It's really weird. And Sanzo taps really fast to it. It's he clearly is not prepared to be in there and have any kind of submission defense of any kind. But whatever. It goes quickly. He pretty much that's the entire fight. He grabs him, he knocks that submission on, and that's that. And Jerry Bolander gets to be the first UFC lightweight or light heavyweight tournament champion. It was interesting sort of looking at that and seeing Bolander do his thing here. Bolander didn't have a huge career. He didn't have a tremendous number of fights, but he wins this inaugural tournament. He had some good things. When we recently did when we're doing the Bloody Elbows baddest tournaments, and we did light heavyweight recently. And in watching this show, it made me a little bit regret that Bolander never even, like, nobody even nominated him or anything like that. I feel like he deserves at least to be contemplated as somebody who you maybe put in a field of the like 30 best light heavyweights. He probably doesn't deserve to actually get in there, but I wish we had at least talked about him. You know, he's got a historic spot.
Yeah, he definitely does. He went on and he had another win in the UFC, and then had a pretty bad loss to Tito Ortiz. And yeah, I think that was about it. His last fight was in 2004, and actually went out on a win, which was cool. That's something super rare.
Cool thing about him, actually. So that 2004 fight was sort of a kind of late comeback fight for him. He actually sort of officially retired earlier than that in 2001. And the reason he retired is because after the events of September 11th, he felt that he sort of felt a calling to go out and help people. And he went into law enforcement after 9/11 because he just felt like he needed to, do something for the community and do something for people. And so he walked away from MMA to do that. So, that is awesome, and that's amazing. And many thanks to you, Jerry Bolander, for doing that. That's really cool.
Yeah, hats off to him. I like Jerry Bolander. I even thought in his interviews he was real eloquent and honest with his just assessment of himself. Like, I thought he was great for the sport, really great, and being so young too, only 22 years old here, and he just seemed really wise beyond his years, and it was cool. It was fun to watch, and good on him.
Yeah.
Now he did have I would say he had a pretty ridiculously easy.
This is true.
Here, like
this is valid.
But nonetheless, he won. He did say in his post-fight interview that he wanted to fight Takahashi, so you got to respect that. It's not like he was ducking him or anything. That definitely would have been a better fight for sure. Definitely a much more gritty fight. But yeah, so both of Bolander's UFC 12 opponents never fought again.
Bolander does have, you're right, he does have a very easy path here. And he does ultimately, you know, a lot of his UFC career is, I think, defined by that loss to Tito Ortiz. But he does have a really good win at, I think it's UFC 16 or so, over Kevin Jackson. That's a very good win, and certainly the best win of his career. Jackson was a big deal at the time, and that was a strong win. So that really sort of, I think, established him as kind of, I mean, really, he's kind of the top guy for a brief little bit in the very beginning of the lightweight division before like Tito and Frank Shamrock come in and sort of establish themselves. But there's this little window, you know, at the very start of it where it's Bolander.
Yeah, absolutely. He was definitely one of the first. Pioneer. We call him a pioneer of the lighter divisions.
For sure.
All right, so this brings us to the heavyweight tournament finals. Tank Abbott, of course, he is commentating. He is not expecting much out of Belfort. He's got a little bit of a grudge with Scott Ferrazzo. So it's interesting. I'm so glad they brought in Tank for the commentary. Like, what an A+ move that was.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. But Vitor Belfort defeats Scott Ferrazzo by TKO 43 seconds into the first round. And this fight was awesome. So they come out, and Ferrazzo's like, come on. And Vitor's like, I'm a counter fighter, bro. And he lets Ferrazzo come to him, and just they're like measuring each other. And then Vitor lets out this left hand across. And I mean, it was like a snake bite. Like, it was like the fastest thing I've ever seen. Like, it comes out and just touches Ferrazzo on the chin. Boop. And Ferrazzo's like, oh, shit. And then they square up for another second. And then, boom, the same left hand comes just as fast. And that one actually buckles Ferrazzo. He drops to his knees. Vitor jumps on top of him, spins to his back, and starts just relentlessly punching him in the back of the head, in the back of the neck, until Big John peels him off. Ferrazzo had no idea the match was over, still tries to keep going. Officials have to, like, rush in and subdue him. Crazy awesome performance for Vitor.
It's crazy. It's the Vitor hands. No ground game. 2 fights, no ground game shown from. I mean, a little bit of like going behind, but no actual jiu-jitsu shown because he doesn't need to, because he shows off his hands here, and it's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's really an impressive performance. Like you said, it's fast. It's stinging, these like fast stinging blows. I mean, you think about, you know, again, Ferrazzo is a big dude who's been in there with other big dudes and, you know, taking shots from guys. And for Vitor to be able to just like bloop, and stun him so badly it's really impressive. And it really speaks to not just his hand speed, but also the power that he packs in that hand speed, which sometimes those two don't always go hand in hand. You know, you've got the guys who are capable of really, you know, throwing them out, but they're not exactly going to really hurt you with those.
Case in point, sorry, but yeah. Tank Abbott actually said on the broadcast, he goes, Roy Jones Jr. isn't knocking out Mike Tyson.
Yes.
Right. That could be true. However, this isn't boxing. And, you know, it doesn't take but 1 or 2 with the little gloves to get the job done.
Exactly. One of the things I love here, it's really exciting. And one of the things I love here, and I like this about these early UFCs, is that, you know, winning this tournament is such a big deal, because we're still at the time where it feels like a you know, a tournament win or a major win in the UFC is validating for like your style and your camp, and like it's sort of proving something to the world. And so when Vitor wins this, the cage is just flooded with all of the Carlson Gracie camp, you know, a ton of people in there, and tons of people you'll recognize, you know, like Alan Goes is in there, and Carlson obviously, and all sorts of folks. And, you know, it's nuts. I mean, they're hoisting him up, they're chanting Vitor, they're parading him around the ring, the crowd's going crazy. It really, it's got a lot of weight. It really feels like, you know, a huge moment and a huge, like, you know, a huge legitimate crowning of a guy here. It's really it's cool. I like seeing how excited they all are about the win.
Yeah, and talk about changing of a guard, right? This was a time where, you know, you can get away with just being big, but Vitor showed us that, you know, being big is great and all, but being athletic and having technique is much more effective. I mean, this was the new breed of mixed martial artist, and you know, Ferrazzo just was not. He wasn't ready for that.
No,
Hate to say it.
And he knows it because he retires right after this. You know, this is it. This is the last fight. And he's somebody who, like I said, he had respect for the sport. He talked about, like, you know, training hard and all that kind of stuff. But he ran into this and was like, no, this is not gonna. I am not sticking around for this.
Which was pretty smart, you know. I mean, if that happened to me, I wouldn't. I wouldn't want any part of that. You know what I mean? But man, Vitor, he showed up and put the world on notice. Even Tank Abbott gave him credit at that point. I mean, even he won over Tank Abbott. You know, nobody wins over Tank Abbott, but Tank had to show his respect because he knew eventually he was probably going to have to dance with him, which we'll get to that at a later time. But, you know, last pro fight for Ferrazzo, but, and I say but.
Yes.
He did go on to fight Tank Abbott in a backyard brawl not too long ago, and it was every bit of terrible as you would expect. It was embarrassing at best. And if you got a nice buzz on, maybe you play the UFC 12 drinking game, go and check it out. Why not?
It is amazing. It's like, how long? It's like 15 minutes or something like that. It's long. Like, and it is literally the two of them in a backyard. Like, it was supposed to maybe be an actual fight, but then nobody would make it happen. So it's just them, like, in a backyard with, like, leaves and sticks on the ground and, like, some dudes standing around drinking. And is most of it, the vast majority of it, is one of them just kind of, like, laying on top of the other. It's awful, but it's on YouTube, so go enjoy and have a grand old time.
Yeah, so that's UFC 12. It was fun. It was historic. It was the sport evolving into the next phase with new weight classes and the birth of a heavyweight title. We saw a dominating wrestler win the UFC heavyweight title, who was also a super athlete. We saw the Phenom give us a glimpse of what the future mixed martial artist would look like and what it would entail. You know, someone who's dangerous in all areas and hyper athletic. What are your final thoughts on the card?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think you summed it up. It's a fun show. I feel like there's just a lot of, like, there's a combination of some great performances. There's not a ton of, like, really great back and forth fights. Severn Coleman is probably fight of the night, but, you know, some great performances, just some weird stuff like Ishmael and Takahashi, just weird.
That actually might be fight of the night, unfortunately.
I think that might be fight of the night. It's a great fight. And it's just, you know, it's just a fun show. And again, I appreciate the history behind it. And, you know, that brings me to one thing that we didn't talk about, but really quickly have to mention, is that it has all these things, like you said, they're pushing things forward. They're trying to sort of clean up the sport. And they kind of have to, because this is also the birth of a real bad period for them from a business standpoint, where they you know, wanted this show to be in New York and they got kicked out and they have to settle for being in Dothan, Alabama, and a bunch of their pay-per-view providers dropped them here. So we're not fully enmeshed in the so-called dark ages here, but we're pretty close. They're needing to do something to get away from the human cockfighting label and get themselves some respectability. And they are making those strides here. I think it's really cool to see that slice of history.
And it was a nice comeback event for the UFC after UFC 11, which, I mean, was a shit show.
Yeah, it's a disaster.
UFC 11 was really bad. Yeah. I don't even know if we're even going to touch that one because it was so bad. But yeah, so this was a good bounce back fight, or bounce back event for the UFC, and yeah, just a good time, all around good time.
Yeah, right, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I definitely did. And
I wasn't sure. I was a little dicey on the pick because it's a weird one, but I'm glad it was a good time.
It's such a great mix of, like, you got the super athletes, and you got your Belfort and your Colemans, and then you got your freak show fights with, you know, your Ferrazzo versus Mullen, and you got your like old school no rules fight with Ismail and Takahashi. Like, it's just, and the lighter division. So I mean, it has like a little bit of everything for everyone. Like, what a solid, complete event this was, I'll say. All right, well, that's our show. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Fraser, for joining me. Real quick, it's time for Eddie's pick.
Yeah.
So the next time we meet, we are going to be discussing Pride 10, Return of the Warriors.
Whoa.
This
Throw
is
it down.
Ken Shamrock versus Fujita, Sakuraba versus Henzo Gracie, Vanderlei Silva, Guy Metzger, Rico Rodriguez, Gary Goodridge, Vitor Belfort, Igor Vojtechkin. I mean, this is an awesome, awesome card. I cannot wait to talk about it. So we will be back. But until then, you can find Fraser on Twitter at FCoffeine. You can find me on Twitter at TheEddieMercado. You can read us both over at BloodyElbow.com. If you like this show, smash the like button. It's the thumbs up down below. Tell us about your favorite early MMA moment in the comments section. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Whitelist us on your ad blockers. And I guess that's it. Fraser, you got anything you want to pimp out?
No, I got nothing. Just, appreciate it. Pride 10. We'll be here next time.
Oh, it's going to be good. Until then, we'll see you next time. Now go be a good person.